October 13th, 1997. Gillette, Wyoming. 14-year-old Amanda Gallion leaves her home to head for school, but never arrives and is eventually reported missing. Suspicion turns towards Amanda's 20-year-old boyfriend, Patrick Ghering, who denies any knowledge of her disappearance and goes missing himself when his abandoned vehicle is discovered by the side of the road 6 days later. Over the years, 2 convicted criminals are suspected of being responsible for Amanda's disappearance, but the leads never pan out, and no trace of Amanda or Patrick is ever found. After that, the trail went cold. Hello everyone, and welcome to our latest episode of The Trail Went Cold. I'm your host Robin Warder, and today I will be covering a missing persons case involving a couple, the 1997 disappearances of 14-year-old Amanda Gallion and her 20-year-old boyfriend Patrick Ghering. But this story is unique in that the couple didn't disappear together, but actually went missing under completely different circumstances 6 days apart. Naturally, given their age difference and the questionable nature of their relationship, the initial assumption was that Amanda and Patrick might have run away together, but there has been no trace of them in 20 years, and something clearly doesn't add up here. There have been a number of potential leads in Amanda's disappearance, including speculation that she was a victim of Nathaniel Bar-Jonah, one of the most evil criminals you will ever hear about, and a controversial series of events in which a man on trial for another crime was accused of confessing to Amanda's murder, but that whole episode would turn into a complete mess. However, amid all these twists and turns involving Amanda, Patrick Ghering seems to have been completely forgotten about, and there's virtually no information out there about his disappearance. But I'm going to explore both cases on this episode, and determine the likelihood of whether or not they are connected. Anyway, before we get started, just a quick reminder that The Trail Went Cold is a weekly podcast which is currently available for download on several platforms including iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play Music. So if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it, and please leave us a rating or review on any of those sites to help spread the word and garner us more exposure. The Trail Went Cold is finally on Patreon, so if you would like to learn how to support the show, please visit our page at patreon.com/thetrailwentcold. For as little as $1 a month, you can garner access to exclusive rewards from our podcast, which may include stickers and thank you cards from yours truly, early access to episodes, and bonus content. So with all that out of the way, let us now examine the unsolved disappearances of Amanda Gallion and Patrick Ghering. Our story begins in the town of Gillette, Wyoming in 1997. One of our central figures is 14-year-old Amanda Gallion, who recently moved to the area with her family and has only been living there for 6 weeks at this point. On the morning of October 13th, Amanda left her home on her bicycle to ride to school. However, Amanda never arrived, and the school failed to notify her parents about her absence. When she did not return home by 6 p.m., Amanda's parents went to the police and reported her missing. Her bicycle would soon be discovered by the side of the road off Interstate 90. Well, the first person to appear on the police's radar was Amanda's boyfriend, Patrick Ghering, who also happened to be 20 years old. Needless to say, the fact that Amanda was underage was a cause for concern, and the initial theory was that Amanda ran away. In fact, Amanda had run away from home only 2 weeks earlier, but then returned the following day. Patrick was questioned by police, and claimed that he saw Amanda while she was riding to school at around 7:15 a.m. This technically made Patrick the last person to see her alive, but he denied any knowledge of her whereabouts. In spite of this, police still believed that Patrick might be hiding Amanda somewhere, but within a week, Patrick himself would become a missing person. On October 19th, Patrick's vehicle was discovered abandoned, and he could not be found anywhere. The vehicle was parked on the wrong side of a road, facing the wrong direction. Of course, it was initially suspected that Amanda and Patrick had run away together, but no trace of either of them could be found. During the past 20 years, there has been no activity on their social security numbers, leading to speculation that they both might have become victims of foul play. But were their disappearances connected? Or was it just a coincidence that they both happened to go missing within such a short time period? Well, this pretty much brings an end to Patrick's story, as there have been no developments in his case during the past 2 decades, but there would be a number of unexpected twists and turns in Amanda's disappearance. In 2000, the Gillette Police Department were contacted by the authorities in Great Falls, Montana. The Great Falls PD were looking into the disappearance of Zachary Ramsey, a 10-year-old boy who had gone missing on his way to school on February 6, 1996, and they had a prime suspect named Nathaniel Bar-Jonah. A witness had recalled seeing Zachary crying and being followed by a man matching Bar-Jonah's description shortly before he disappeared. Even though Zachary's body was never found, Bar-Jonah was eventually charged with the boy's murder and aggravated kidnapping. Now, I'll just say this right up front. Nathaniel Bar-Jonah is probably the most vile human being I have ever featured on this podcast. Even if you're a true crime fanatic who has explored some pretty horrific cases, reading about Bar-Jonah will probably make your stomach turn. I won't explore his backstory in too much depth, and I'll try to avoid graphic details, but just reading the guy's Wikipedia page will make your skin crawl. Anyway, long story short, Bar-Jonah had an extensive history of abducting, molesting, and attempting to murder young children, dating all the way back to the 1970s. He served time in a Massachusetts prison and state hospital, and moved to Montana shortly after being released in 1991. No one can be certain how many children Bar-Jonah preyed on, but when his apartment was searched, a list was discovered containing the names of boys he had victimized, including Zachary Ramsey, who had the word "died" written beside him. But here's the most terrific part of this story. Bar-Jonah was into cannibalism, and it's believed that the reason Zachary's remains have never been found is because Bar-Jonah ate them, and even went so far as to feed them to guests during cookouts. Well, before Bar-Jonah could go on trial for Zachary's murder, the charges had to be dropped due to lack of evidence, as Zachary's mother was still clinging to the hope that her son was still alive somewhere. However, Bar-Jonah was convicted on charges of kidnapping, aggravated assault, and sexual assault for his attacks on other children. He received a 130-year sentence before he died of a blood clot in his prison cell in 2008. So what potential connection does Bar-Jonah have to Amanda Gallion's disappearance? Well, it turned out that on October 12, 1997, the day before Amanda went missing, Bar-Jonah traveled 450 miles from Great Falls to Gillette and checked into a motel on the outskirts of town at around 8 p.m. Bar-Jonah was next seen at an antique mall in Billings, Montana at 2 p.m. the following afternoon, and he arrived back in Great Falls at around 9 o'clock. While there was no evidence that Bar-Jonah had involvement in Amanda's disappearance, investigators could not overlook the fact that he could be placed in Gillette right before she went missing. Even though Bar-Jonah was never officially convicted of a murder, 21 crushed bone fragments were found buried in his garage following his arrest, the largest of which was an 1.5-inch long forearm bone which belonged to a young male. DNA testing ruled out the possibility that these remains belonged to Amanda or Zachary Ramsey, and it's unknown who they actually belonged to. Well, in January 2007, Amanda's disappearance popped up on the radar again after an unlikely connection to another case. At the time, 39-year-old James Strahl was being held at Union County Jail in Elk Point, South Dakota, awaiting trial for the murder of a 52-year-old farmer named William O'Hare. In May of 1998, the two men had hooked up at an adult bookstore in Sioux City, Iowa, allegedly after O'Hare agreed to pay Strahl for sex. They then traveled to O'Hare's farm near Beresford, South Dakota, and had sex, but when O'Hare refused to drive Strahl home, Strahl responded by bludgeoning his skull with a ball-peen hammer before fleeing the scene in O'Hare's car. The case against Strahl seemed pretty strong because his fingerprints and DNA were found at O'Hare's house and inside his stolen vehicle, and he had allegedly shared details about the crime with one of his cellmates, Aloysius Blackcrow, who was going to testify as a witness at Strahl's trial. But things became a lot more complicated when Blackcrow told the authorities that Strahl had also bragged about being responsible for the murder of Amanda Gallion. According to Blackcrow, Strahl had confessed to picking up Amanda hitchhiking while she was running away from home, and that she told him she was 18. He claimed that he was so high on drugs that when Amanda resisted his sexual advances, he proceeded to rape and murder her before disposing of her body. On the surface, Blackcrow's story seemed to check out, since a time card from Strahl's place of employment showed that he was absent from work during the time period Amanda went missing. But Strahl maintained that he had no involvement in her disappearance, never confessed anything to Blackcrow, and that the story was a complete lie. While Strahl's defense team filed a motion to suppress the alleged confession at his trial, Blackcrow was serving 2 consecutive 40-year sentences for first-degree robbery at that time, and had been incarcerated in Montana before he was transferred to South Dakota. It turned out that Blackcrow had been transferred for his own safety because he had a history of snitching on his fellow inmates, and the defense argued that the state had placed Blackcrow in the Union County Jail in order to coerce information out of Strahl in exchange for a reduced sentence. In the end, the trial judge ruled that Blackcrow could testify as a witness against Strahl in regards to information about William O'Hare's murder, but he was not allowed to mention anything about Amanda Gallion. Strahl went on trial in September of that year and would be found guilty of first-degree murder and grand theft and sentenced to life imprisonment. Even though Strahl could not be charged in relation to Amanda's disappearance, her father, Don Gallion, openly expressed his opinion to the media that he believed Strahl was responsible. However, there would soon be a major complication. 2 months before Strahl's trial, Blackcrow had provided information to the authorities about an alleged confession in another missing persons case, and this time, he provided a tape recording. According to Blackcrow, another cellmate of his named David Licken had told him he was responsible for the disappearances of Pamela Jackson and Cheryl Miller, 2 17-year-old friends who had gone missing together while driving to a party in Union County in May of 1971. Blackcrow secretly tape-recorded Licken confessing to raping and killing both girls, and after this tape recording was turned over to investigators, Licken was charged with their murders. Well, guess what? The person on the tape recording wasn't even David Licken. It was eventually discovered that Blackcrow had convinced another cellmate to impersonate Licken and make a tape-recorded confession to the crime. So not only had Blackcrow successfully framed Licken for murder, it would later turn out that the 2 girls were not even murdered at all. In 2013, a rusted Studebaker containing the skeletal remains of Pamela Jackson and Cheryl Miller was found submerged in a creek, as they had simply driven into the water and drowned, and their deaths were nothing more than a tragic accident. The murder charges against Licken were dropped, and Aloysius Blackcrow would receive an additional 10-year sentence after pleading guilty to 2 counts of perjury. So obviously, this put Blackcrow's allegations about James Strahl confessing to the murder of Amanda Gallion into serious question. Even though no mention of Amanda had been made at Strahl's trial, Blackcrow had testified about Strahl confessing to his involvement in William O'Hare's murder. Now that Blackcrow's credibility as a witness was completely destroyed, the South Dakota Supreme Court ruled that this was grounds for Strahl's conviction to be overturned, and he was awarded a new trial. However, even without Blackcrow's testimony, the case against Strahl was still pretty rock solid, so rather than go on trial a second time, he agreed to a plea deal in which he pled guilty to first-degree manslaughter and grand theft, and was given a sentence of 35 years. Strahl continued to maintain that he had no involvement in Amanda Gallion's disappearance, and even passed a polygraph when questioned about it. And in July 2014, Strahl died in prison after an extended illness. Even after all these developments, there are still no answers about what actually happened to Amanda, and there has been no trace of her or Patrick Ghering during the past 20 years. So I guess you could say, the trail went cold. So this is a pretty frustrating mystery, and one in which learning more information about the backgrounds of the two missing victims would go a long way at helping one figure out what might have happened. At first, this seems like a simple case of a young girl being abducted by an unknown predator while on her way to school, much like the Tabitha Tudors case I featured on the podcast last month. And in another parallel with Tabitha's case, Amanda's disappearance was seriously hampered by the fact that the school never notified her parents about her absence after she failed to show up that morning, and they did not realize she was missing until that evening, by which point nearly 12 hours had passed. But the big intangible here is the disappearance of Amanda's boyfriend, Patrick Ghering, less than 1 week later. If these disappearances aren't connected, then that's one hell of a coincidence. I guess the biggest issue here is that we really don't know all that much about Amanda or Patrick as people. We know that Amanda attempted to run away on at least one occasion prior to her disappearance before she returned home, so she may have had a bit of a rebellious side. While we know virtually nothing about Patrick, the fact that he was a 20-year-old involved in a relationship with an underage 14-year-old could definitely generate a lot of assumptions about his character. We don't know too much about this relationship, but since Amanda had moved to the area only 6 weeks before she went missing, the relationship might not have been going on all that long. Of course, it's a reasonable assumption that Amanda's parents did not approve of her being involved with a 20-year-old, though I can't say with 100% certainty if that's true. The only time I've seen anything from Amanda's parents in the media is after James Strahl was convicted of murder, and her father publicly expressed his belief that Strahl killed her. Otherwise, I have no idea what kind of home life Amanda had, or if she got along well with her parents. If they disapproved of her relationship with Patrick, then this is one missing persons case in which it wasn't unreasonable for the police to assume that she ran away at first. However, the passage of time now makes that a very unlikely scenario. It seems like police initially thought that Patrick was concealing Amanda somewhere during the first days of her disappearance. It's interesting how Patrick is technically the last person to see Amanda alive, since he claimed he saw her riding her bicycle to school at 7:15 a.m. But it's never been clarified where exactly this sighting took place, or how close they lived to one another. Did Patrick come over to Amanda's house to see her off to school that morning, or did he see her at another location? When Patrick disappeared himself 6 days later, the most logical conclusion was that he and Amanda decided to run away together, but even if that did occur, I really don't see how they could manage to stay off the radar this long. Like I mentioned earlier, there has been no activity at all in either of their social security numbers, meaning they both would have been unable to get jobs, driver's licenses, or credit cards during the past 20 years. Yes, back in the pre-9/11 era, theoretically, I guess it was easier to acquire new identities or fake social security numbers and start a new life somewhere, but I have serious doubts that a 20-year-old and a 14-year-old from a small town in Wyoming would have been capable of something like that. So unless they have somehow managed to completely live off the grid these past 2 decades, I just don't think that Amanda or Patrick are still alive. Another odd detail is how their modes of transportation were both found abandoned. Amanda's bicycle was discovered by the road near the I-90, which seems to point to an abduction, though if she ran away, I suppose the bike could have been left there intentionally. Patrick's vehicle was also found abandoned, which begs the question, if he was running away, what was his transportation out of the area? Sure, friends and family could have helped him skip town, but we know nothing about them. There's also the fact that the vehicle was apparently found on the wrong side of the road, facing the wrong direction, which seems to indicate that it was deliberately planted in that position, rather than something happening to Patrick after he pulled over. Without knowing more about Amanda or Patrick's backgrounds, I can't form any concrete theories about what might have happened here, but I'll get back to them a little later. For now, let's discuss the 2 suspects who were investigated for their potential involvement in Amanda's disappearance, James Strahl and Nathaniel Bar-Jonah. Both these suspects are currently deceased, so it would be difficult to link either of them to this case without strong evidence. Now we know that the development with Strahl turned into a complete farce thanks to Aloysius Blackcrow. Anyone who follows wrongful conviction cases knows about the potential problems of using the testimony of jailhouse informants as serious evidence to prosecute people for crimes. Convicted career criminals who are already serving lengthy sentences have nothing to lose by lying like that, and will gladly do so if they feel they can receive something in exchange, such as a reduced sentence. But as far as prison snitches go, Aloysius Blackcrow really takes the cake. And it's a shame his presence had to taint the trial for William O'Hare's murder, because that was technically not a wrongful conviction. James Straw was clearly guilty of that crime, and there was strong evidence against him, even without Blackcrow's testimony. But oddly, it might have been a blessing in disguise that these events took place, because even though the allegations against Straw about Amanda's murder probably weren't true, her disappearance wound up garnering some extra publicity. Otherwise, the case might have languished in obscurity and been completely forgotten about today. After the new revelations about Blackcrow, I have no idea if Amanda's family still believes that Straw killed her. I might be willing to lend more credence to the idea that Straw did confess to the crime, were it not for the revelation that Blackcrow got another inmate to impersonate David Licken and tape recorded him confessing to the murders of Pamela Jackson and Cheryl Miller. There's committing perjury, and then there's going the extra mile to flat out frame someone for a crime they didn't commit. When you couple in the fact that the Jackson-Miller case was eventually solved, and it turned out there was no foul play involved, you can't take anything Blackcrow says seriously. And really, without his so-called confession, what evidence is there that Straw was responsible for Amanda's disappearance? Yes, employment records do show that Straw wasn't at work on the day she went missing, but that doesn't prove he was out murdering anyone. What we do know about Straw is that he was convicted of bludgeoning a 52-year-old man to death after they had sex together, and he didn't even bother to conceal the crime. That's much different than raping and murdering a 14-year-old girl and disposing of her body so thoroughly that she's never been found. As far as I can tell, O'Hare's death is the only murder Straw was ever connected to, so it's not like he's an established serial killer or anything. Unless some solid evidence emerges to link Straw with Amanda's case, I'm inclined to think he has no involvement with her disappearance. Now, Nathaniel Bar-Jonah, he's a more intriguing suspect, though given what we know about him, I hope to God Amanda never crossed paths with this animal, because he's about as awful as it gets. While Bar-Jonah was charged and convicted of a number of heinous crimes, it's pretty incredible that he was never officially convicted of murder. Sadly, it seems very likely that he murdered Zachary Ramsey, and since bone fragments were found in his garage which have yet to be matched with anyone, he has probably killed at least one other child. It must be acknowledged that Amanda does not fit the profile of Bar-Jonah's typical victim. He mostly liked to target boys, though he did abduct and assault at least one girl during the 1970s. However, Amanda would sometimes apparently be mistaken for a boy while riding her bicycle through her neighborhood, so if he saw her from a distance, Bar-Jonah theoretically could have made the same wrongful assumption and targeted and abducted Amanda before he even realized she was a girl. Of course, teenage victims who were Amanda's age were also not part of Bar-Jonah's MO, as he preferred prepubescent children, but again, if he only saw Amanda from a distance while she was riding a bicycle quickly, he could have initially assumed that she was younger than she was. Under normal circumstances, there really wouldn't be much reason to consider Bar-Jonah as a suspect, but I cannot overlook the fact that he checked into a motel in Gillette the very night before Amanda went missing. Gillette only had a population of around 19,000 around this time, so what are the odds that one of the worst child abductors imaginable would arrive in this town about 12 hours before a local child went missing? On top of that, there really doesn't seem to be any established reason for Bar-Jonah to be in Gillette to begin with. On the morning of October 12th, he told his roommate in Great Falls that he was taking his mother's car on a quote-unquote road trip and said that it was none of her business where he was going. And that night, he arrives in Gillette, which is 450 miles and a nearly 7-hour drive away. Amanda was last seen at 7:15 a.m. the following morning, and the next confirmed sighting of Bar-Jonah took place at 2 p.m. at a mall in Billings, Montana, which is over 230 miles away, before he arrived back home in Great Falls at 9 o'clock that night. It takes nearly 3.5 hours to drive from Gillette to Billings, so theoretically, Bar-Jonah would have had enough time to abduct and murder Amanda that morning, dispose of her body, and arrive in Billings by 2 o'clock. And let's not forget that Amanda's bicycle was found near the I-90, which is the quickest route from Gillette to Billings. So even though Amanda does not fit Bar-Jonah's victim profile, the pieces of the puzzle do fit together here. The biggest issue is that there just doesn't seem to be any logical reason for Bar-Jonah to have made such a lengthy round trip from Great Falls to Gillette, unless he wanted to find a random victim to prey upon. If he traveled to an entirely different state to do this, then it would be more difficult to trace the crime back to him. This is why I just cannot rule out the possibility of Bar-Jonah being the perpetrator. But of course, the big complication here is, if Amanda was abducted and murdered by Nathaniel Bar-Jonah, what happened to Patrick Ghering? Because I highly doubt that Bar-Jonah would travel back to Gillette 6 days later in order to abduct and murder a 20-year-old male. So now we're going to try and talk about the most baffling element of this mystery. There's a thread out there about this case at the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit, in which posters have shared numerous potential theories about what might have happened to Patrick, but once again, since there's virtually no information about his background, and very little information out there about Amanda, these theories are all just pure speculation. Even if Bar-Jonah or some other predator was the real perpetrator, all eyes were clearly on Patrick in the initial stages of the investigation, and the authorities suspected that he knew what happened to Amanda. I don't know if they suspected that Patrick harmed her, but at the very least, they figured he was hiding Amanda from her family. But just suppose that Patrick was completely innocent here. Maybe the guy got paranoid that the disappearance was going to be pinned on him, no matter what, so he decided to skip town. However, that doesn't explain why Patrick would abandon his vehicle, or why there's been no activity on his social security number during the past 20 years. While a much darker theory which has been proposed is that Patrick may have been the victim of vigilante justice. After all, even before Amanda went missing, her family may not have been thrilled about her having a 20-year-old boyfriend. Even if Patrick wasn't responsible for what happened to Amanda, perhaps someone close to her was so convinced that he'd done something that they went after him, and the end result was Patrick being killed and his body being hidden. It might have been accidental, because Amanda was not a confirmed murder victim at this point, just a missing person, but things could have escalated out of control, and Patrick wound up dead before anyone could learn the truth about what happened. Of course, there's no evidence of this, and we know very little about Amanda's family or friends, so I definitely don't want to accuse anyone of anything, but the theory is worth addressing. Another possibility is that Amanda was killed by someone Patrick knew, who then proceeded to kill him 6 days later, perhaps after Patrick made an attempt to confront them. On the other side of the coin, another theory is that Patrick killed Amanda. One possibility is that Amanda became pregnant, and given that she was underage, this would have caused a lot of potential legal problems for Patrick. Or it might not have been a murder, but something like an accidental overdose, which needed to be covered up. Knowing that the heat was on him, Patrick then either decided to skip town, or even possibly went somewhere to commit suicide. Strangely, none of the sources actually specify where Patrick's abandoned vehicle was found, only that it was by the side of a road. But if it was near a wooded area, and Patrick went there to end his life, then his remains could have gone undiscovered all this time. Given the short amount of time Amanda had been living in Gillette, it's also been theorized that her so-called relationship with Patrick was something much darker. Perhaps he was some sort of pimp who preyed upon underage girls, and Amanda became a victim of sex trafficking. Again, we know so little about Patrick, and I hate to accuse a missing person of being a murderer or sex trafficker without evidence, but these theories are out there. So what are the other options here? Well, another possibility is that after hiding her for a couple days, Patrick and Amanda did run away together, or attempted to run away together, but fell victim to foul play by an unknown third party. Perhaps they were making an attempt to leave town in Patrick's vehicle, but crossed paths with some killer who murdered them both and disposed of their bodies. I realize the odds against something like that happening have to be astronomical, and I also cannot explain why Patrick's car would be found on the wrong side of the road facing the wrong direction, but I just have the feeling that something bad did happen to Patrick, regardless of whether Amanda was with him at the time or not. I don't know. Even though she does not fit the profile of his typical victim, I just have a gut feeling that Amanda crossed paths with Nathaniel Bar-Jonah on the morning she disappeared. There's no direct evidence of this, but the fact that Bar-Jonah happened to travel 450 miles to Gillette for unexplained reasons and then drove back home the same day Amanda went missing gives me the impression that he was scouting for a victim. Perhaps Bar-Jonah could not find any younger children in the area to abduct, or he just did not have a suitable opportunity, so even though Amanda was a bit older than he liked, he decided to grab her because he happened to see her riding alone. But if that's the case, what happened to Patrick? Overall, I think you can plant me squarely on the fence with this one. While I can come up with some logical theories to account for Amanda and Patrick's separate disappearances, it's hard to come up with a theory which accounts for both of them. For all we know, their disappearances might not even be connected at all, as they each could have fallen victim to completely different perpetrators, and it's just a massive coincidence that they happened to go missing within 6 days of each other under completely different circumstances. I think there's definitely a piece of this puzzle missing, and if more information were to surface about Patrick and his background, it might shed some light on what happened. The only thing I am reasonably certain about is that Amanda and Patrick are no longer alive today, as I just don't see how they could both live completely off the grid for the past 20 years. But whether they fell victim to the same person remains to be seen. So if you happen to have any information about the unsolved disappearances of Amanda Gallion or Patrick Ghering, please contact the Gillette Police Department at 307-682-5155. That's 307-682-5155. But if you just have your own thoughts about what happened, feel free to leave me a comment or send me an email at robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. Anyway, before we wrap things up, another reminder that The Trail Went Cold has just been launched on Patreon, so if you have a moment, please visit patreon.com/thetrailwentcold to learn how you can support our podcast and become eligible for some pretty neat rewards. Last month, we released our very first exclusive bonus episode for our donors in Tiers 2 and 3, which chronicled the life of Robert Stack. This month, we have an exclusive bonus episode about the Jeffrey McDonald case and his controversial conviction for the murders of his wife and 2 daughters. We're also releasing our next piece of exclusive video content for our Tier 3 donors, so keep your eyes out for that, and feel free to visit our Patreon page for more information. I would also like to express my thanks to our most recent listeners who have signed up to support us on Patreon, Jay Browner and Caitlin E. Thank you so much for your generosity. I also just wanted to give another shout out to my supporters at the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit, who have the internet's most extensive discussion about today's case, and the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum. I need to provide my thanks to McGill Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and Vince Nitro, who composes our eerie music score. I'd also like to remind everyone that The Trail Went Cold, and this includes McGill, Vince, and myself, will be appearing at the Modern Love Podcasting Convention at the Intercontinental Hotel in New Orleans from August 10th to the 12th. We will be participating in a panel discussion and also performing our own live show. If you would like to purchase tickets to the event, you can visit podern.love and use our promo code RobertStack to receive a 10% discount. That's podern.love, and the promo code is RobertStack with a space in the middle to receive 10% off. And just one more reminder that I will be appearing at the Canadian Crime Podcast event, a live show being held at the Hideout Bar in Toronto on July 22nd. It includes myself and a number of other Canadian true crime podcasters, and for more information on the event and how you can purchase tickets, you can find a link to our Eventbrite page in today's episode description. If you haven't already, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, or leave us a rating or review on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play Music. And we also have a Facebook discussion group, so if you would like to discuss these cases or true crime in general with myself and your fellow listeners, feel free to join. I'll approve your entry into the group ASAP. So have yourself a good week and join me next Wednesday for a brand new episode of The Trail Went Cold.